Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel. And finally I've got my grubby mitts on the new Psychic Awakening book, The Ritual of the Damned. This is the one that covers the Grey Knights, the Dark Angels, and more importantly, the Thousand Sons. Obviously for me, being a big Thousand Sons fan, this is the section that we're going to be focusing on in this book. Although having a quick scan through, the Grey Knights and Dark Angels seem to be the biggest focus of the book, and the Thousand Sons are a little bit of an afterthought. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through exactly what I think of the new Thousand Sons content. We'll go through, have a little bit of a chat about it, have a look at the different cults, the new stratagems, and see what we think. So let's get straight into the video. So the first thing I want to talk about is Legion organisation, which has led us to the various cults. Now, in the Thousand Sons Codex, this is quite a big piece of the fluff. So we've got a big double-page spread of the Legion organisation, which shows how a Thousand Sons force is formed. So we have 9 cults, because 9 being the magic number of Tzeentch. Each of those cults is then split into sects, and each of those sects into thrallbands. And those thrallbands are made up of aspiring sorcerers and squads, and they all then form into your force organisation, or into your chapter or legion organisation. Very similar to how, you know, a typical Space Marine chapter is kind of made up, but this is specific to the Thousand Sons. So we're given a whole bunch of background, but in actual gameplay terms, it didn't mean anything. So finally now, the Psychic Awakening book is developing on this a little bit, and giving us something a bit special to do with each of these cults. And we're going to break these down in the rest of the video. Before we specifically dive into the 9 cults of the Legion, we also have a bunch of other bits and pieces that come with Psychic Awakening. The first is 7 new stratagems. So we've got a whole bunch of new stratagems that we can now use with our Thousand Sons, some of which are rather nasty, so we'll get to those after we've covered the cults. We also then get some clarification of hateful assault and malicious volleys. Now these have been covered in FAQs online already, they've now been wrapped up into the book. So for those that are unaware, Hateful Assault is like the equivalent of the Imperial Shock Assault, where we now basically gain an extra attack if we are charged or actually commit the charge. So any Heretic Astartes unit that does that now gains an extra attack. We also get that clarification on Malicious Volleys, which is basically Bolt of Discipline. So yeah, if you're stationary, you get those extra shots with your bolt guns. And you can ignore those if they're on a Dreadnought or they're on a Terminator, for example. So we do get those 2 clarifications, but we have seen those in the online FAQs already. But what is new are the cults of the Legion and these 7 new stratagems. So let's delve into the cults of the Legion then. So starting from the very start, what do these actually give us? Well, in effect, they give us an extra psychic power, a warlord trait, and a sorceress arcana, or aka a relic, per cult. Now, in order to be in a cult, you have to have a battle-forged army that includes a Thousand Sons detachment. That's it. So it doesn't prevent soup. It is not a mono-faction bonus. What it allows you to do is, if you've got a Chaos Force that happens to have Thousand Sons detachments in it, that detachment can belong to a cult. If you run multiple detachments of multiple Thousand Sons units, then you can run multiple cults. If you do that, every Thousand Sons unit in that detachment, excluding, now this is quite important, excluding cultists and especially Zangor units, gain the cult faction keyword for that specific cult. So for example, Cult of Prophecy, they will gain that faction keyword as part of their unit entry. This also excludes named characters. Now we only have Araman and Magnus for that, so those 2 are also excluded if you use those in your detachment. You can still have them in your detachment, they just don't gain that extra cult faction keyword, therefore they cannot be affected by some of these psychic powers, for example. So as I mentioned, what we do get is a new psychic power per cult, a new warlord trait, and a new sorceress arcana option. So how do we get those psychic powers? Well, every Thousand Sons cult psyker knows that relevant cult psychic power in addition to any other psychic powers they know. So this is basically a freebie. So normally your psyker will know 1, 2, or potentially 3 if they're a super powerful psyker, and they will now know this one in addition. So basically, you know, everyone knows Smite. In this case, everyone's going to know Smite and their cult psychic power. For the warlord traits, if your Thousand Sons cult character is your warlord, they can have that relevant cult warlord trait instead of the one from the Thousand Sons Codex. And finally, if your army is led by a Thousand Sons Cult Warlord, you can give a relevant Cult Sorceress Arcana relic to a Thousand Sons Cult character model from your army instead of giving him a Sorceress Arcana relic from the Thousand Sons Codex. Again, excludes named characters like Araman and Magnus because their weapons are automatically their relic. So fairly straightforward then, fairly simple. So let's delve into each of these cults. First up is the Cult of Prophecy. The psychic power from this is Divine the Future. It's a warp charge value of 6. And then when you do that, when you cast that power, you roll a d6 and you keep that dice to one side showing that value. And you can use that dice to replace a single rolled dice for a hit, wound, advanced charge, psychic test, deny the witch, or morale dice. It's basically very similar to how the miracle dice work for the Sisters of Battle. We just get the 1 in this case, but you can use it to replace a single rolled dice, which could be quite handy, especially on things like psychic tests where you've got a really bad dice roll, or if you're looking to avoid running away and you've got a really low dice, you can then use it in the morale phase. So quite a handy little option. The Warlord trait is called Guided by the Whispers. Once per turn, after this Warlord fires Overwatch, it can immediately move 6 inches as if it was your movement phase. So very handy for getting yourself out of a potential charge that you've left your character, potentially here in this case your Warlord. If you've left him in a spot of bother and you needed to get him out of the way, he can fire Overwatch regardless of whether it misses, which most Overwatch tends to do so. All he's got to do is actually fire it, he can then run away. So quite a handy one to get your Warlord out of trouble. Finally, the Sorceress Arcana is Pythic Brazier. When a unit within 6 inches of a friendly model with this relic is chosen to shoot or fight with, you can re-roll 1 hit, 1 wound, or 1 damage roll. So this is basically a free command point. So this could be really useful on one of your characters, such as a Demon Prince, for example, to save you using a command point. They get a bucket of attacks. They are re-rolling ones anyway, but quite often, just when you don't want it to, you're going to get a bad roll. Now, with 7 or 8 attacks on the charge, the Demon Prince, can use his natural re-roll of 1s anyway, because he's only hitting on a 2+. But sometimes you're just going to get that bad wound roll, and you've got a double damage weapon, for example, with Malefic Talons. You want that extra damage in there. Sometimes you're going to spend a CP. In this case, you're not going to have to. Next up is the Cult of Time. So again, we have a psychic power. This time it is Time Flux. This has a warp charge value of 5. If manifested, select 1 friendly Cult of Time infantry unit within 6 inches of the Psyker. Now remember, with Brotherhood of Sorcerers, we are doubling these ranges. So actually this is now 12 inches of the Psyker. You can return a destroyed model from that unit to the battlefield with all its wounds remaining, placing it in unit coherency. And if you rolled a psychic test of 9+ unmodified, so if you've got any characters that are doing this that have got a buff, it has to be the natural dice roll. You can instead return D3 destroyed models to that unit, to the battlefield, with all of their wounds remaining, placing them back into coherency. Where this is going to come really quite handy is on those Scarab Occult Terminators. The Warlord trait for the Cult of Time is Immaterial Echo. In your psychic phase, if this Warlord manifests a psychic power with a psychic test of 9+, this Warlord can attempt to manifest an additional psychic power that phase. Only 1 additional psychic power can be manifested as a result of this Warlord trait. Now it doesn't say unmodified in this case, so if you do have any buffs on your dudes somehow, then it's going to be an unmodified. It's going to be a modified roll of 9+, so you could actually chain together an extra power. Finally, we have in our Sorceress Arcana, we have Hourglass of Manat. The first time a model with this relic is destroyed, at the end of that phase, return that model to play with D3 wounds remaining, placing it as close as possible to the position where he died, more than an inch away from enemy models. This is quite nice, isn't it? Obviously, we can't use this on our super powerful named characters because they already have a relic. But this is, again, quite handy for, those times when you're, potentially your Demon Prince, or if you're running decent Exalted Sorcerers, for example, and you get yourself into a spot of bother, he gets killed, but you can bring him back into the game. Very similar to like a reanimation protocol kind of thing from the Necrons. Next up is the Cult of Mutation. The psychic power in this section is called Warp Reality with a warp charge of 6. If manifested, select 1 terrain feature within 18 inches of the Psyker. Again, 24 for Brotherhood of Sorcerers. Then select 1 enemy unit within 3 inches of that terrain feature. and until the start of your next psychic phase, half that unit's move characteristic and -1 from its advance and charge rolls. Very, very quite good is what I would say. This can really shut down those fast-moving hidden units preparing to assault you. You know, things like Gene Stealers with those massive charge ranges, massive move ranges that are just going to try and sit there behind line of sight so that you can't shoot them, and then going to be ready to pounce on you in the next turn. Very, very handy to try and prevent that by halving that movement. The Warlord trait is called Touch of Vicissitude. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. When resolving an attack made with a melee weapon by this Warlord, an unmodified hit roll of a 6 inflicts a mortal wound on the target in addition to any other damage. Any force multipliers that do that is always quite nice. Again, it's unmodified, so any bonuses that you get to hit are not going to be worried about, but an unmodified roll of a 6 inflicting an extra mortal wound can turn the tide in that one-on-one combat. Finally, the Sorcerer's Arcana is Exalted Mutation. Sorcerer only in this case. Now, that will include Exalted Sorcerers as well, and your Terminator Sorcerers, because they all have that Sorcerer keyword. Add 1 to the Strength, Toughness, and Attacks characteristic of a model with this relic. I think this is one of my favourite relics in the entire section. There's a whole bunch of really cool things that we can do here. So, for example, I tend to like running Exalted Sorcerers. You can make these quite good. So on the charge, or if you're being charged, for example, your Exalted Sorcerer is going to have 6 attacks at Strength 7, AP -1, doing D3 damage. You can then stack that with something like Diabolic Strength. That then makes you a Strength 9 with 7 attacks. And if you take a Familiar and replace a power in your regular options with the Boon of Change from the Disciples of Tzeentch, you can really stack those character stats even more. This can make you either potentially Toughness 6, give you an extra attack, making 8 attacks, or even making your attacks Strength 10. Now, because Boon of Change is that random D3 roll to give you attack, strength, or toughness, that does give you a little bit of a concern. You're not getting a guarantee on those, but all 3 of those are pretty good. You know, Toughness 6 probably not as much as going from Toughness 5 to Toughness 6, not as epic as adding an extra attack, and certainly not as epic as going to Strength 10. That can really do the damage. Next up, we move into the Cult of Scheming. The psychic power is Seeded Strategy. Warp charge of 6. If manifested, select one friendly Cult of Scheming unit within 24 inches of the Psyker, which is now 30. The unit can shoot and charge this turn even if it fell back. That's a massive range. It does only affect your cult units in this case, as it specifically states, but basically turns you into an Ultramarine without any modifiers. So you can shoot and charge this turn even if they fell back. So very, very handy. That ability is not that common across many factions, so being able to turn that one in is pretty good. The Warlord trait is Grand Schemer. So whilst they're within 3 inches of the Warlord, friendly Cult of Scheming units gain the Disciples of Tzeentch ability. This basically is the objective secured. So if your troops, if they're not troops, and they're on an objective, then they will count as objective secured for that objective. If your units already have that, then you double the unit count, so each model will count as 2 models for the purposes of determining who controls the objective marker. Now bear in mind that we can take things like Rubric A in 20-man units that already have the Disciples of Tzeentch. They're now going to be worth 40 models if they're at maximum strength. That is, in a stratagem game where you're after objectives, is very, very good. Finally, the Sorcerer's Arcana is Chakithul's Theorem. I'll let you decide whether that's pronounced correctly or not. You can see it on the screen. Once per battle, in any phase, you can use that theorem if a model with this relic is on the battlefield. If you do, select one stratagem, and until the end of that phase, or until that stratagem is used by that model with this relic's controlling player, whichever comes first, reduce the command point cost of that stratagem to 0. Again, probably one of my favourites in the entire section, in the entire Psychic Awakening point of this. Very, very handy for picking expensive stratagems that you tend not to use. You could use this on Cycle of Slaughter, from what I can tell, which is affecting things like Zangor units, which costs 2 CP, because it doesn't say that you can't use them on non-cult models. It is just a relic available to the army. And also things like Coruscating Beam, which is 3 command points. Something you don't often see, which is basically a mortal wound issuing laser, but very expensive. So quite often you don't see that, but in this case we're now going to get that for free. But it is only once per battle, so you do only get it the once. Next up is the Cult of Magic. The psychic power is Astral Blast. Probably my favourite one out of all of the lot. So you can see there's lots of cool things across all the different ones. Not one single one really stands out. Super powerful here. Warp charge of 6. If manifested, the closest enemy unit within 9 inches, which plus 6 makes it 15, and visible to the Psyker, it suffers a D3 mortal wounds. And each other unit within 3 inches of that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. The Brotherhood of Sorcerer's ability only increases the range of that of this psychic power, of the first range. So it only increases it to 9 to 15. It doesn't increase that 3-inch part to 9 inches. Really, really handy for those grouped up castle type units. It's 15 inches. It is pretty close. But the ability to dish out so many mortal wounds to a castle type setup, very, very powerful. I really, really like it. The Warlord trait is a devastating sorcery. When the Warlord manifests a psychic power that inflicts 1 or more mortal wounds on an enemy unit, increase the mortal wounds inflicted on that unit by 1. E.g., D3 becomes D3 plus 1. Now let's combine that and talk about that with Astral Blast. So where we had D3 mortal wounds on a target and then 1 mortal wound for every unit within 3, that's now D3 plus 1 and then a flat 2 mortal wounds to every unit surrounding it. Now we all know, and we all love, how the new Imperium models are all double wounded with their Primaris. 1 mortal wound tends to not really be that effective against a squad of Intercessors, for example. Now you're doing 2 mortal wounds, you're removing a model at a time. Far more effective. So stacking that together is very, very good. Doesn't say it's only restricted to 1 power either, so we can actually combine this with several other things like Doombolt or Tzeentch's Firestorm or Smite or Infernal Gaze. Anything that dishes out mortal wounds, and you're now going to get a multiplier on that with an extra one. That's going to be great, especially for those dual power wielding psychers that are going to fire out 2 potential psychic powers, or take some familiars, for example, where we get to, or not a familiar, sorry, the stratagem to cast an extra power and do 3 powers that cast mortal wounds. That's now going to give you the best bang for your buck. Finally, the Sorcerer's Arcana is Arcane Focus. When a psychic test is taken from a model with this relic, add 1 to the total. Now this is a relic. Now if you're not going to take that Warlord trait, in this case the Devastating Sorcery one, it will still combine with High Magister, which is the Warlord trait out of the Thousand Sons Codex, which basically means your character can now get +2 for his psychic casting. Doesn't say in here anywhere where this cannot stack. Next up is the Cult of Knowledge, and we go in with the Psychic Delve. So warp charge of 6, and if manifested, select 1 enemy unit within 18 inches, which is 24 for us, of this Psyker until the start of your next Psychic phase. When resolving an attack made against a unit by a friendly Cult of Knowledge unit, reroll a wound of 1. A wound roll of 1. It's a very baby Primaris Lieutenant, right? It's alright, it's not great. Warp charge of 6, yeah, I mean, it's okay. Not super convinced by that, but you know, we don't have any other ways of re-rolling wound rolls of 1, so this is quite a handy one. But I think there's other things that are probably more of use. The Warlord trait is Ardent Scholar. When a psychic test is taken from this model, you can re-roll dice rolls of 1. Very handy for getting yourself out of perils, but there are other ways of doing that that we'll get to very shortly. The Sorcerer's Arcana is Encaledion's Cry. Now this is a replacement to a Warp Flame pistol. So a few models, you know, your Psychers will carry Warp Flame pistols if you've paid the points for it, if they're not carrying the standard Inferno bolt pistol. It replaces it with the following profile: a range of 12, a pistol D6, strength 6, AP -2 and 1 damage, and auto hits as standard with a Flamer pistol. What this does over a Warp Flamer is it's double its range and it's double its strength. So normally a pistol is 6 with a strength of 3. We've now got more than that with a strength of 6. Now that's not a bad pistol, to be honest. A range of 12, especially if you're deep striking in, for example, or you're appearing 9 inches away, which is the magic number in this game. You're now going to be in range with that Flamer pistol, doing D6 shots. That's a little bit better. than the standard pistol, where you would be out of range. Next up is the Cult of Change. Now we have a psychic power called Disturb Reality. A warp charge of 6. If manifested, select an enemy unit within 12, again plus 6, of this psyker until the end of the next psychic phase. Subtract 1 from that unit's leadership and attacks characteristic to a minimum of 1. Any debuffs are always welcome. It's a shame it's not like -1 to hit or something like that, but knocking units' leadership and then causing them for failing morale and all that kind of stuff is always handy. -1 to their attacks. It's never a bad thing, right? If you're facing a unit that's going to charge you. The Warlord trait is Fickle Nature. You can re-roll charge rolls made for this Warlord. The Warlord can shoot and charge in a turn in which it fell back. So if you've got a combat monster of a Warlord, that is pretty handy. I've had a few times where I've had, a Demon Prince, for example, that could have done with being able to charge in a turn in which it fell back. So it falls back out of the way so that another unit can shoot it, kind of leaves itself in its open, and then needs to get back into combat again. So I quite like this one, especially on a Winged Demon Prince. So the Sorceress Arcana then is Capricious Crest. Once per turn, when a Psychic Fest is taken for a model within 18 inches, 24, of a model with this relic, you can change the result of the Psychic test as follows. If the result is from your army, you can change any roll of a 1 to a roll of a 6. If it's from your opponent's army, you can change any roll of a 6 to a roll of a 1. This is hilarious. I think this is one of the best powers in the book. Not only can it prevent you causing perils, because if you roll that double 1, you now get basically a 1 and a 6, because you can change any roll of a 1 to a roll of a 6. And then you can also potentially cause the opponent to fail their psychic tests. If they get that big 6 roll off on one of the dice, you can bring it down to a 1. I think that's brilliant. I think it's really fitting. I think it's a very fluffy rule. I think there's some good fun can be had with that one, especially if you're facing another psychic heavy army. Or even if they just got the one psyker, you can really shut him down, because a 24-inch range of that is actually pretty good. The Cult of Duplicity is next, and the psychic power is Sorceress Facade. Now this is the highest warp charge. It is 7. It's the highest of all 9. If manifested, select one friendly Cult of Duplicity units within 6 inches of the psyker. Remove that unit from the battlefield, then set it up anywhere else on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from the enemy. This unit is treated as having moved this turn. This is amazing. This is basically the jump, or almost like a second Dark Matter Crystal for your army. Being able to redeploy like that is very good. Bear in mind that this can be done in turn 1, because you've already set the unit up and then you do it in the psychic test phase. So very similar to something like the jump. So I really like it. It's warp charge of 7, so it's an average to get it off unless you put it on a character that's got a bit of a buff. I really like that. I can't see any problems with that one at all. Another really good, powerful psychic power. The Warlord trait is a Duplicitous Tactician. At the start of the first battle round, before the first turn begins, select up to D3 units from the Cult of Duplicity from your army, remove them from the battlefield, and then set them up again following the normal deployment rules. So I think there's an Alderi thing that can do something very similar, where you basically redeploy units based off of where your opponent has put their models. If you do it with a transport model, all the units inside the transport also remain within that as well. So things like a Rhino or a Land Raider, for example. Very handy to try and bait out some potential shooting from your enemy, if you know they've already got turn 1. But equally, it's after you've determined who's going first, because it is done before the first turn begins. So if you've rolled off and you've done the seize roll and everything, then you can do it. So that is quite a powerful thing to do, knowing who is going first already. The Sorceress Arcana then is Perfidious Tomb. At the start of the battle round, roll a d6. If the model with that relic is on the battlefield, on a 1, the opponent gains a command point. On a 4+, you gain a command point. So basically a 50-50 to get command point farming, but equally runs a risk of giving your opponent one. Quite good fun, really, isn't it? I think that's another fluffy and thematic one. I'm not sure whether I'd use it or not. It depends how hungry your army is for command points. Finally, number 9 then is the Cult of Manipulation. The psychic power is Attempted Possession, warp charge of 6. If manifested, select an enemy character unit within 18 plus 6 of the psyker. That unit suffers a mortal wound. A good way of basically psychic sniping a character. Until the start of your next psychic phase, when the psychic test is taken for the enemy unit, subtract 2 from the test. So it's a debuff potential anti-psyker ability, right? So you're going to try and target a psyker because that gets the most benefit. But equally, it's a good mortal wound snipe off of enemy. The Warlord trait is Beguiling Influence. Subtract 1 to a minimum of 1 from the attacks characteristic of models in enemy units while they're within 1 inch of the Warlord. So another debuff for when your Warlord is in a spot of bother. Helps prevent him being too mobbed up with attacks. Finally, the Sorceress Arcane is Sorthis Reflector. Basically, this is a way to steal the enemy's close combat weapons. So, when the model with this relic is chosen to fight in the fight phase, you can select one enemy infantry model with a leadership of 9 or less, which is pretty much most characters, except a very few that have got that leadership 10. Within 1 inch of the model, select one melee weapon the enemy model is equipped with, and until the end of that phase, your model is basically counted as having been equipped with that enemy model's weapon. And it can only make attacks against that enemy model's unit, but you cannot re-roll or the hit rolls or the wound rolls whilst using that weapon. So really handy to nick, I don't know, maybe a Baden sword or a Thunder Hammer or something of that ilk, where you can nick that off the opponent and then smash them in the face with it. So what are my favourite of the 9 cults then? Well, I think there's room for most of them in many armies. But my favourites are the Cult of Mutation, specifically for the Exalted Mutation and Touch of Vicissitude. I also really like the Cult of Scheming for the Psychic Power of Seeded Strategy, which enables you to shoot and charge even if you fell back. And also the Shakithal's Theorem I really like as well, because that's the one that enables you to use stratagems for free. And I also like Cult of Magic for that Astral Blast psychic power and the Devastating Sorcery Warlord trait, which is that Mortal Wound multiplier. I really like all 3 of those. I think those are my three favourites out of the 9. But I'm going to give them all a go and see if there's a fair chance for any of them, and see if there's anything that I've missed in my analysis. Let's finally talk about the stratagems then. So we have 7 new stratagems that we can use. For 1 command point, we have Magister. Use this stratagem before the battle. After nominating your Warlord, you can select a Thousand Sons character model from your army that is not your Warlord and determine an extra Warlord trait for them. Basically, like everyone else these days, we now have the ability to have 2 Warlord traits. Second up, for another command point, is Infernal Fusillade. Use this stratagem when a Rubric Marines unit or Scarab Occult Terminators unit from your army is chosen to shoot with in your shooting phase. Till the end of that phase, models in that unit can shoot twice with rapid fire weapons, if that unit did not move this turn. Very, very handy, especially with malicious volleys now in play. Prescience added to that as well can really output or multiply the output of those rapid fire bolt guns to a really good level. It's only a command point, very, very cheap. A good way to dish out some of that AP -2 goodness. For 2 command points then, which is the most expensive out of all of the 7 new ones, is Yoked Automator. Use this stratagem at the end of your opponent's charge phase. Select one enemy unit that finished a charge move within an inch of a Thousand Sons character other than Zangor unit. So excludes, for example, the Shaman. A Rubric Marine or Scarab Occult Terminator unit from your army within 12 inches of that enemy unit, and who's not within an inch of an enemy unit already, can perform a heroic intervention as if it were a character. And when doing so, can move up to 2d6 instead of the usual 3 inches. That unit from your army must end that move within an inch of the enemy unit and not within an inch of enemy or other enemy units. Otherwise it doesn't move. Basically this sounds really fluffy, doesn't it? So you've got your character that's in a spot of bother, you've got a sorcerer up there, he's been mobbed by an enemy unit, and suddenly he clicks his fingers and a whole bunch of Rubrics and Scarab Occult Terminators appear by his side to defend him. I think that is so fluffy. It's probably one of the most fluffy stratagems that's going. It's not... Is it overpowered? For 2 command points, I don't think so. Is it thematic? Damn right it is. It is superbly fluffy. For 1 command point then, we go to Risen Rubrique. Use this stratagem when you set up a Rubric Marines unit from your army during deployment. That unit can then be set up anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from the enemy deployment zone and enemy models. You can only use this stratagem once per battle. That is awesome. It is basically a super infiltrate for a Rubric Marines unit. Bear in mind, your Rubrique can go up to 20 man strong. Okay, that might prohibit where they can specifically go, and you can't be in the enemy deployment zone. But this is a great infiltration unit, and then you can combine that with something like Infernal Fusillade, because you haven't moved. All you've done is just redeployed. And you can use it on turn 1, so you cannot be interfered with in any way, shape or form, because you can use it on turn 1. It is not a deep strike. It is you are deployed and then you're redeployed. Very, very powerful. 1 command point, super cheap, and that command point is kind of magnified the more Rubrique you take. So if you take that unit, you know, a minimum of 10, for example, or more, this becomes even more powerful because you've got more and more bolt guns, Inferno bolt guns, to actually use when you get up nice and close. For 1 command point then, we have Sorceress Infusion. Use this stratagem after resolving a psychic power manifested by a Thousand Sons model from your army, and if the result of that psychic test for that power is 9 or higher. So you have to get 9 first, then you can use this command point. If that model's unit contains any models that have not lost any wounds, select one of these models to regain D3 lost wounds. Otherwise, if any models in that unit have been destroyed, you can return one of those models to the battlefield with all of its wounds remaining, placing it in coherency. Another really, really fluffy one. It's like reanimating your dust boys. I think that's a really another good fluffy ability. 1 command point is Indomitable Foes. Use this stratagem when a Rubric Marine or Scarab Occult Terminator unit from your army is chosen as the target for an attack. Till the end of the phase, improve that unit's invulnerable save by 1 to a maximum of 3. This is awesome, let's be honest, because Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult have a 5+ invulnerable save. For 1 command point, you're picking a unit here to now have a 4+ invulnerable save. Doesn't say it doesn't stack with anything else, so why not then add Weaver of Fates to that unit, which is another +1 to the invulnerable save, which means that unit now has a 3+ invulnerable save. Again, with Rubric Marines or Scarab Occult, if you max out those units, you're going to get the best possible force multiplier for that single command point on this stratagem. Combine that with Risen Rubrique, for example, where you are basically, you know, almost deep striking, putting them really up in the grill of your enemy, and then you start increasing the defense of that unit with these invulnerable saves, could really make a unit just that much harder and that more difficult to shift. Finally, the last one then is, for 1 command point, is Adepts of the Immaterium. Use this stratagem if a Thousand Sun Psyker from your army would suffer perils of the warp. That Psyker does not suffer it. So as I said when we were going through some of the cult abilities, there's ways around perils now. You're such a psychic heavy army that you're dishing out an awful lot of psychic powers. You are going to roll perils multiple times during a game, let's be honest. We now have the ability to change dice rolls. We now have the ability to, for a single command point, prevent perils of the warp. Very, very handy. Very, very needed for a psychic heavy army. The biggest strength they had, they're expensive models, the biggest strength they have is that psychic mortal wound offense. What you don't want to do is then lose those characters and lose those models due to those bad dice rolls that you're going to get. It will happen, let's be honest. So it's great to see a very good Perils of the Warp defense. One final thing I want to talk about in this video then is the points value changes of note. Now, with Chapter Approved 2019, we had a whole bunch of points that were changed across the Thousand Sons. We've now had that presented just in this little bit as well. I just want to cover a couple of things that I'm really quite happy with, and things maybe I'm not happy with, who knows. So the notable changes for me, the first one is the Demon Prince with wings. In the Codex originally, he was 170 points. Taking the second pair of talons, for example, made him 180. That's now gone up. He's now 195. This is 30 points more than a regular Mark of Tzeentch Chaos Demon Prince. So they're normally 30 points cheaper than that, 165. But what we're getting for that is an extra point of invulnerable save. We're going to get a 4+ invulnerable save. and we can now cast 2 powers instead of 1, which is what you'd normally get out of the regular Chaos Codex. So 30 points for an extra point of invulnerable save and a second power. Probably pointed about right. Let's be honest, it's 50-50 invulnerable save is much better than a 5+, and 2 powers when you're putting it onto a Demon Prince or his supporting units is very, very powerful. He is a monster of a creature. Everyone loves a good Demon Prince. 30 points is probably fair. We also have a drop in points on our Scarab Occult Terminators. When they first came out with their power weapons and their combi bolters, they were 44 points each. Chapter Approved dropped them down, 2018 Chapter Approved that is, dropped them down 3 points. They've now gone down by a further 4, so the same loadout is now 37 points for your bog standard Scarab Occult Terminator. Next up on my recommended list, or my notable points change, is Chaos Spawn. Again, when they originally came out, they were 33. They dropped to 25 in 2018. They're now down to 20 points for a Chaos Spawn. I think these are highly underrated units. They're a very cheap, fast attack slot. If you're trying to fill out a brigade detachment, which is quite difficult to do, let's be honest, 60 points for 3 Chaos Spawn is very, very cheap way of doing it. Finally, as with the Chaos Demons Codex, Flamers have dropped to 20 points. So you can take nice little demons in your force. They're now 20 points. I love my Flamers. And finally, just to complete out my favoured changes here, the Forge Fiend is down in points as well. So he's down to just 120 points with 2 Hades autocannons. That doesn't include the Ectoplasma option that he could take. Originally, when he first came out, 169 points with that same equipment. Dropped to 140 in Chapter 2018. Dropped to further 20. He is now 120 points with those 2 Hades autocannons. Those are my real notable points changes that especially affecting me, because those are units that I typically take. So really happy to see a few drops in points, as always. So there we go then, guys. Those are my thoughts and opinions on the new Psychic Awakening book that impact the Thousand Sons. As usual, I'd love to know in the comment section below what you think. Have you had any experience using any detachments with the new cults? Thought of any other cool combinations that could possibly work for your forces? Now, as I've kind of said during the video, I think all 9 certainly have their place. I think a lot of them are very thematic, which is always good coming from sort of a narrative background. There are a few nice little powerful combinations in there. I don't think this is going to take the Thousand Sons, you know, into the Iron Hands League just yet. But certainly opens up some really cool options, some really flavourful stuff as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Anything where we can get those new psychic powers, because we've got so many psychers in the army, I do struggle with, you know, spending those psychic power phases on something that is something a bit different. So, you know, we've got 6 powers to use. We've now got an optional 9 powers, which we can use, you know, as many as we can squeeze detachments in. So typically that's going to be, you know, maybe 2, potentially 3 extra powers into a regular game of sort of 1750 to 2000 points, where we can get 3 decent detachments in. So yeah, I'm all in favour of that, opening up some of those options, and it all comes down to your army composition as usual, which ones are going to benefit you most. But I think I've got a few ideas up my sleeve that I've discussed during the video. I'm looking forward to giving them a try on the battlefield. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it was useful to you. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.